Well, if it isn't me, Riley, from the A-side. And today I am starting kind of a project to end off 2021 per se. I am going to review the rest of the Arctic Monkeys discography. Now, I've already reviewed Favorite Worst Nightmare and Humbug. Both can be found, I'll maybe put them in the description below, but they can be found on this channel. Favorite Worst Nightmare, I still absolutely adore that album. And Humbug, on the other hand, has actually grown on me quite a bit from when I first reviewed it in July. I still have my problems with it, but it's definitely gone up my rankings in the records of their discography. Now, I put up a Twitter poll asking what you guys wanted me to review first out of the albums I haven't reviewed, and it tied between Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, and AM. So I decided I'm going to go with AM first and end this series with Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. Now, Arctic Monkeys were always a really big deal in the UK. Of course, their debut album is the fastest-selling debut album of all time in the UK, but they hadn't really crossed over too much, especially in America, until 2013 with the release of AM, when they kind of took the world by storm. This album was huge, and it still is huge. You still hear Do I Want to Know everywhere, and we'll get into that later. And this album is really big, and I feel like that also, while it made Arctic Monkeys a world-class household name, I think it also kind of hurt their reputation in a way. This album and this band got really big with kind of like the indie kids, and now a lot of people, especially the more kind of pretentious music critic people, and kind of music enthusiasts, tend to look at Arctic Monkeys as that band for obnoxious indie kids. When in reality that's not the case. They kind of forget the acclaim and the importance of Whatever People Say That's What I'm Not, and even Favorite Worst Nightmare. They forget that this is the same band that wrote songs like A Certain Romance and The View from the Afternoon, because of this album's kind of reputation and how beloved it is by some people who are not necessarily the most tasteful or likable people on earth. That being said, this album is still very split within the Arctic Monkeys fandom, and music opinions as a whole. For example, at one point a couple years ago, NME named it the best album of the 2010s decade up to that point, whereas Anthony Fantano gave it like a 3 out of 10. Where do I fall on this album? Do I love it? Do I think it was one of the best albums of the 2010s decade? Absolutely not. I like this album. I mean, I really enjoy it, but I wouldn't say I love it, and it's far from one of the best albums of the 2010s decade. I mean, putting this over an album like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy or Plastic Beach, I don't think so. Even in the rock categories, you had Too Rare to Live, Too Rare to Die coming out the same year, which I think is a much better album than this, personally. But do I hate it? No, absolutely not. I do not think this is 3 out of 10. There are a lot of good moments on here. Some moments I would dare say perfect off of this album, believe it or not. Now, the stylings of this album are very interesting, and I will give it that. A lot of this album is very hip-hop influenced. A lot of the instrumentation on this album sounds like something that could be rapped over by someone like Snoop Dogg. And this is kind of mixed with this really kind of sensual club vibe. I hate using the word sexy to describe something because it sounds cringy, but that's the only way I can kind of describe a lot of this. It is very kind of promiscuous feeling in a lot of spots. But it's all like, alternative rock, your typical almost stoner rocky instrumentation throughout the entire thing. And it kind of creates this interesting sound, unlike a lot of other stuff. But the problem is, it's the same sound over and over again, and this band doesn't take any risks on this album, and that becomes especially noticeable in the second half, how Arctic Monkeys are not taking enough risks with the sound of this album, and it becomes very repetitive and very formulaic, especially like the last couple of tracks. You're just kind of begging to get through it because you feel like you've heard it before. Now, a big problem with this album is how front-loaded it is. And I'm going to say something that sounds crazy. The fact that there's a song so good that starts this album kind of hurts it. And that song is Do I Want to Know? Because this takes everything that they tried to do in this album and does it perfectly. This band is firing on all cylinders. Every single idea they have on this song is executed perfectly. It works so well. And of course, this song blew up. It made them famous worldwide. And it's a classic. There's a reason you know every word to it. And it still gets played. It's still lauded as being amazing. So, is it worth it? Does it deserve all this praise? And I would say absolutely. It's one of the greatest songs ever written. The way Alex Turner is begging for this girl, and the fact that he would do anything to just crawl back to her no matter what. And it's been called the ultimate simp song. And yeah, sure it is, but Alex writes with such proficiency lyrics like "Crawling Back to You, Never Thought of Calling When You Had a Few." But even though they are so desperate and pleading, Alex just sounds way too cool to really care throughout the entirety of the song. He just sells how cool he is. He sounds like he's chilling in a bar with sunglasses and a martini while people are silently wanting to be him. It's pretty great. And as far as the instrumental goes, once again, it's just so sensual sounding. You can cut the sexual tension of the song with a knife, and you can feel it. And once again, Alex just sells it so well. And the riffs on this thing are iconic. The I'm sure you've heard a million times in your life before. And that, just paired with the lyrics, like I said, make this song work so well. I mean, I'm going to read some of these lyrics to you right now. Have some aces up your sleeve. Have you no idea that you're in deep? I dreamt about you nearly every night this week. How many secrets can you keep? Because there's this tune I found that makes me think of you somehow, and I play it on repeat until I fall asleep. It's so romantic, the fact that he thinks about this person kind of from day to night, how he would crawl back to them no matter what. And like I said, the kind of really vibey, sexy kind of riffs and musicality of the song works so well. It fires on all cylinders. So here's the problem of the song being so good. The rest of the album goes for something similar, but it never does it as well because the band does so perfectly on Do I Want to Know. Some of the rest of the songs lack in comparison to it because they're trying to do something similar, and as I said, this album doesn't take many risks. So the fact that the album opens with such a classic and perfect song, really everything else in comparison doesn't work as well and falls flat, with the notable exception of follow-up song Are You Mine, which is the most energetic this band gets on the album. This song is just a banger, and I would say it's probably better than Do I Want to Know. And this song is also so bold, too. Alex being like, "Are you mine?" That is so just upfront and, like I said, bold. And Alex comes off so confident on this song that you can't help but feel like a badass while you listen to it. Especially when the music cuts out and when Alex sings that she's a silver lining climbing on my desires. And then later she's a Lone Ranger riding through my mind through an open space in my mind when she's not right there beside me, and the music just kind of cuts out and then comes back in full force. It's just a great little moment of, oh, wow. And like I said, you feel like an absolute badass when you listen to the song, and you can't help but bang out to it the entire time. It just works so well. Really, it's everything good about Do I Want to Know, but injected with meth and Adderall because it's so much faster and you're just bopping out to it. And like I said, it's the most energetic this album gets. It's the best track on this album by far. So the next track is One for the Road, and this one you can really start to feel that hip-hop influence bleed into the music. It really does sound like something you can rap over, and my man, Lil Alex, does drop a verse on this track. I know it sounds really bad because a lot of the times rock stars trying to rap doesn't always turn out the greatest. I'm looking at you, Mike Love. It works here, actually. I think Alex does a pretty decent job, and I think One for the Road is a pretty good song. I like the little rap part. Overall, very solid song. It feels like it pales in comparison a little bit to Do I Want to Know and Are You Mine, especially Do I Want to Know, because it doesn't have as much energy as Are You Mine, but it's still a very solid song indeed. Next it goes into Arabella, which is another song I do really enjoy. I have my problems with it, but I think overall it's a really good song. I like this song lyrically, how it describes a lover with lyrics like she's made of outer space, and her lips are like the galaxy's edge, interstellar constellations, it's a very interesting way of describing your lover in a very passionate and kind of describing this person and their love and the experience with them as almost something transcendent and something celestial, rather, and not of this world, something so amazing that it feels like it comes from outer space. Now, the pre-chorus in Arabella is amazing when the heavy guitars kick in, the dinner, and then Alex kind of starts going in pretty hard, and the energy goes up with the "My days end best when that sun gets itself behind that little lady sitting on the passenger side." I just think that's a really nice little energetic part. Like I said, the lyrics once again evoke a lot of imagery. You think about, this beautiful girl sitting next to you with the sunshine coming down, and the line of the horizon tries, but it's just not as kind on the eyes. And it's a very just great little part of the song. Sadly, it goes into a really weak and underwritten chorus with this really kind of bland Rockstar 101 nah, 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 riff that I feel like I've heard 1,000 times. And the chorus consists of Alex chanting, "It's Arabella." Doesn't work for me. The rest of the song is really good, especially the bridge. Like "She's magic in a cheetah print coat." That whole kind of part, especially into that really sick guitar solo, is great. It's just this chorus doesn't work for me. The rest of the song, though, is very great. "I Want It All," on the other hand, still a good song, but you start to hear kind of the fatigue here a little bit, and you start to hear how repetitive this album gets, and the fact that it just sounds like One for the Road, but maybe not as good. It doesn't have any rapping on it like One for the Road does. I think some of the parts with the falsetto that Alex does is cool on this track, but overall I think it just kind of happens. Like I said, it's not bad at all, but it's just kind of there. It doesn't do much for me. You start to feel kind of the repetitiveness of the album, but it doesn't get too bad just yet. The repetitiveness and kind of fatigue and how this band isn't willing to take a risk on this album starts to get bad really toward the end of this album. Here, it doesn't start to get too heavy yet, so you can still enjoy "I Want It All," because it is a solid song. So then the next part of this album are two slow songs and ballads, and it feels like a lot of the energy just gets completely ripped out of this band in this section. That's for number one, Party Anthem, and Mad Sounds. They just kind of bore me, to be honest. Number one, Party Anthem, of course, is titled, it's the number one party anthem, but it's the slow song on the album. "Look at me, I'm Alex Turner from the Arctic Monkeys, and I'm so quirky." Yeah, it doesn't do much for me. It's a decent little slow song, I guess, but it's rather boring, and like I said, there's not a lot of energy to it. And it's followed by Mad Sounds, which once again is a very kind of energyless song. And I think the first half of the song actually works really well because it's kind of underwritten. It's very not underwritten. It's very minimalistic in a way. And I think that minimalism works. It's not filled with too many different sounds. It's just kind of Alex sitting there, some occasional guitars, and then there are moments of silence. And in those moments of silence, you can hear the buzzing of neon lights, like something you'd hear in a bar, and the percussion has an echo to it, so it makes it sound like Alex is kind of sitting in a bar room by himself after kind of everyone had left, and the mad sounds in his ear are actually his thoughts about how lonely he is, especially when the night ends and he's left by himself in an empty bar to think. I think that works really well, and I think the minimalism is a really good way to show loneliness through music. But because this band can't take any risks, the second half of the song has all the stuff kind of kick in, all the kind of instrumentals and stuff. It makes it sound just like number one party anthem, and there's some background vocals, and it all becomes too much. And without the minimalism, it just becomes a really boring kind of ballad void of any energy. Not any better than number one party anthem. I wish the song would have kind of stayed spacious and minimalist like the first half, because it would have been one of the best songs on the album, but instead it kind of falls flat near the end. So, after these two really boring songs, what does this band do to get the album back on track? And that is by putting one of the best songs on the album there, which is Fireside. I love this song. It works so well, especially near the end. But let's talk about the beginning, with this kind of swinging, kind of cool bass line and some acoustic guitars kind of working together, and Alex comes in. It kind of does its thing, not too different from the rest of the songs. And then there comes the chorus, which is a really great chorus, especially with the kind of background vocals, the distant shoo-ups, just kind of make for a little interesting part, kind of give the chorus a little more flavor. But where this song really shines is that it takes a risk. On these verses, you can hear an organ in the background, and not an organ, sorry, some keyboards in the background. Sounds great, and it's something different that you haven't heard in the rest of the album. And it hits, it works. And then the second half of this album, there's a instrumental breakdown with these electronics and synthesizers that come in. And then there's this beautiful kind of guitar solo. Boom, boom, ba-na-na-na-na, ba-na-na-na. And then they kind of layer on top of each other this guitar solo and these electronics that were in the breakdown, and then throw that on top of with the chorus and the shoo-ups, and the bass and acoustic guitar from the beginning come back in, and they all layer on top of each other, and it's so dense. It's just a dense wall of sound in that moment. And it's the biggest risk taken on this album, and I think it sounds amazing. Almost reminds me of Humbug, something like Cornerstone, where all the different sounds in Cornerstone were kind of layered on top of each other to be beautiful. The ending of the song kind of does the same thing, and it really shines, especially on the second half of the album, where the rest of the album just kind of fades for me, becoming repetitive, and you can really start to hear this repetitiveness in Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High, which is a song I do really enjoy. I think it's solid, but you can start to feel, man, this band isn't taking any risks. They're not changing anything. All of these songs sound the same. They have the same formula. It doesn't do much for me, and I think the bass line, Why You Want to Call Me When You're High, is good. I think the chorus is good. It's not a bad song. It's very enjoyable. In fact, I think just about every song on this album is enjoyable. It just, at this point, gets so formulaic and feels so stale. And it gets even worse when you get to Snap Out of It, which I do enjoy Snap Out of It, actually, probably more than the rest of the songs on this back half. It's got a really nice chorus, I wanna grab both shoulders and shake, baby, snap out of it, if that watch don't continue to swing. That's a really great chorus. I think the melody on it is really solid, but the song loses me at the bridge. It's just got a really lazy and boring transition into the bridge, and the bridge feels useless and like it doesn't have to be here. So even though Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High and Snap Out of It feel formulaic and repetitive, they're still really enjoyable. I still enjoy these songs, but I just lose it at Knee Socks. It just gets to the point where the formula is so tiring, and the sound has become so repetitive, and the blatant fact that this band just does not want to take any risks or try anything different on these deep cuts shows when you get to Knee Socks. And the song isn't bad, it just gets to the point where all your anger and frustration is taken out on it, because it's just, you're done with it. You're done with the way this album sounds. And then to make matters worse, you know how I said I didn't like the bridge on Snap Out of It? The bridge is exactly the same here. Same transition, same sound, kind of same thing. And it just makes me mad. It does not work for me. And even having Joshua Homme of Queens of the Stone Age fame sing this bridge does not save it any. And it closes with I Wanna Be Yours, which sucks, I'm gonna be honest. It's so boring. It's not a good closer whatsoever. Once again, so formulaic and repetitive and stale, like the majority of the second half of this album, and it's to the point where after Knee Socks, you're just so done. You know, that song, despite not being bad, gets the brunt of your I'm sick of this album force, because it's just so kind of unoriginal and so similar to all the songs that came before it. And like I said, all these songs are trying to go for the same thing Do I Want to Know goes for, and Do I Want to Know works so perfectly. It's such a perfect song that all these other songs seem kind of lame in comparison, especially near the end when they just keep trying to do it over and over again. And with I Want to Be Yours, it's someone else's poem. Alex Turner doesn't even bother to write the lyrics on it, so it just kind of feels limp. It feels like the message isn't there, and it's just not a good closer, which is sad because this band is known for amazing closers. A Certain Romance is the closer off their first album, and then 505 is the closer off their second album. They're my first and second favorite Arctic Monkey songs, respectively. They're some of the greatest closing tracks of all time. Hell, even The Jeweler's Hand off of Humbug is something I've grown to really love. I think it's a pretty great closer for that album, specifically the second half. I think the first half of that song's boring, but the second half of that song is great. I Wanna Be Yours doesn't have that second half where there's like psychedelic bliss or anything cool going on. It just kind of meanders until the end. which is unfortunate, but that's life. Now, I kind of was mean to this album throughout this review, but I don't really think it's that bad. I would say it might be my least favorite Arctic Monkeys album. You have to be in a certain mood, I think, and depending on what mood I am, either this or Suckin' and See is my least favorite. I think both are good. This album works in a certain atmosphere, though. If you put this album in and you're driving through the city at night, where the skies are dark, but it's nighttime, but the lights are on, and you're just driving through the city looking at the nightlife, which is what a lot of this album kind of describes, I think that atmosphere works really well for almost all of these tracks. And that's the way this album is supposed to be listened to, but just to kind of cue it up on its own, it can get a little repetitive and stale near the end. That being said, I was harsh on this album because Arctic Monkeys is such a great band, and this album has a lot that's been said about it. Its reputation pretty much precedes it at this point. That being said, I am still feeling a 7 out of 10 on this. I do enjoy a lot of these songs. Like I said, Do I Want to Know is a classic song. It's pretty much perfect in every way. And Are You Mine is even better. And Arabella has its moments. One for the Road and I Want It All are fine. Fireside's great. And I still enjoy most of the back half of this album, but it does get a little stale. So yeah, 7 out of 10 on AM, and I'm going to be reviewing Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino next time. But before you go, my friend has a music project called Modern Amusement, and he just put out a new EP called The Beautiful Infection, and I highly recommend checking it out and go and leaving, just some views or some likes. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube and everything. So make sure you go check him out. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time.